The summer sun bore down on the Texas plains like a brand against bare skin, and Eliza Hartman had long since stopped noticing the way sweat pooled at the small of her back. As she stretched barbed wire across the fence post, her calloused hands steady despite the trembling in her arms. She had been working since dawn, replacing the rotted posts along the eastern boundary of her property, a task that would have been manageable with 2 people, but became an endurance test for one woman alone. The ranch had been her father's once, then her husband's briefly, and now it belonged solely to her after both men had been taken by different kinds of fever within 3 years of each other. That had been 4 years ago, in 1878, and Eliza had learned quickly that sympathy from the neighboring ranchers lasted about as long as a spring rain in this part of Texas, before evaporating into the relentless heat of indifference. She hammered the staple into the wood with more force than necessary, the crack of metal against metal echoing across the empty grassland. The fence stretched for miles, a seemingly endless project that she chipped away at whenever the cattle were tended, the horses fed, the garden weeded, the roof patched, and the 100 other tasks completed that kept a ranch from sliding into ruin. Some days she wondered why she bothered. Some days she knew exactly why, because this land was hers and she would be damned before she let it go. "I've watched you mend fences alone." The voice came from behind her, deep and unhurried, and Eliza spun around so fast she nearly dropped her hammer. A man sat astride a bay horse about 20 feet away, and she cursed herself for being so absorbed in her work that she had not heard his approach. He was tall in the saddle, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were a surprising shade of blue against his sun-weathered face. He wore the standard garb of a working cowboy, dusty denim and a worn leather vest, a hat pushed back just enough that she could see his features clearly. "How long have you been sitting there?" Eliza demanded, her hand moving instinctively to the rifle leaning against the fence post a few feet away. "Long enough to see that you are about to pull that wire too tight on the next section," he said, dismounting with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "It will snap come winter when the cold makes everything contract." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "I have been mending fences for 4 years. I think I know what I am doing." "I am sure you do," he agreed, but he was already walking toward the fence line, examining her work with a critical eye that made her bristle. But even experienced hands get tired, and tired hands make mistakes. "That post there is not set deep enough. First strong wind will have it leaning." She wanted to argue, but when she looked at the post in question, she could see he was right. The hole was perhaps 2 inches shallower than it should have been, her exhaustion making her careless. The admission stuck in her throat like a dry bone. "Nobody ever offered to help me," she said finally, the words coming out harder than she intended, sharp with years of accumulated resentment and bone-deep weariness. The cowboy turned to look at her fully then, and something in his expression shifted, softened in a way that made her chest tight. "Well, I am offering now. Name is Cole Brennan. I have been working the Henderson Ranch about 10 miles west, but the work dried up last week. Been riding through looking for something more permanent." "Eliza Hartman," she replied, suspicion warring with desperate hope in her voice. "I cannot pay much. This ranch barely breaks even most years." "Room and board would be enough for now," Cole said, already moving to the poorly set post and beginning to dig around it with efficient movements. "We can discuss wages later if you decide to keep me on." She should have questioned his motives more, should have demanded references, or at least a more detailed account of his history. But Eliza found herself nodding instead, some instinct deep in her gut telling her that this man was not a threat. Or perhaps she was simply too tired to care, too worn down by the endless solitude and backbreaking work to turn away help when it finally materialized like a mirage made solid. They worked in silence for the next hour, falling into a rhythm that felt startlingly natural. Cole reset the post properly while Eliza stretched the wire, and when she did start to pull it too tight, He stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm and showed her the correct tension. His touch was brief and professional, but she felt the warmth of it even after he had moved away. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, they had completed twice as much fence as Eliza would have managed alone. Her shoulders ached with a different quality than usual, the good ache of work shared rather than work endured. "There is a bunkhouse behind the main barn," she said as they gathered the tools. "It is not fancy, but the roof does not leak and there is a stove for cooking. I will bring out some supplies to get you started." "Obliged," Cole replied, and then he smiled, a slow curve of his mouth that did unexpected things to her pulse. "Breakfast at dawn," she confirmed, and then she was walking back toward the main house, very deliberately not looking over her shoulder to see if he was watching her go. The house felt emptier than usual that evening as Eliza prepared her solitary dinner. She kept finding her thoughts drifting to the bunkhouse, wondering what Cole was doing, whether he had enough blankets, whether he was regretting his offer already. It had been so long since another person occupied space on her property with her permission that she had forgotten how to behave, how to balance hospitality with the fierce independence she had cultivated like a crop. She lay awake long into the night, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, the cattle lowing in the distance, the wind rattling the shutters, the creak of old wood settling. And underneath it all, the awareness that she was not quite alone anymore, that someone else was sleeping under her sky, breathing her air, existing in her orbit. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like relief. Cole proved his worth over the following days with a work ethic that matched her own and skills that exceeded what she had expected. He repaired the irrigation system she had been nursing along with prayers and patchwork. He gentled the wild-eyed colt she had planned to sell because she lacked the time to train him properly, and he rebuilt the chicken coop that had been slowly collapsing for 2 years. He worked from dawn until dusk, and he never complained, never suggested that certain tasks were beneath him or too difficult. They fell into a partnership that felt both strange and familiar, like putting on a coat that fit perfectly despite having belonged to someone else. Eliza found herself looking forward to breakfast each morning, to the quiet conversation over coffee and fried eggs, to the way Cole listened when she talked about the ranch, as though her words mattered. He told her about his own history in pieces, about growing up in Missouri, about learning to rope and ride from his father before the war, about drifting through various ranches and cattle drives for the past 15 years, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "Why did you stop here?" she asked one morning as they worked together to move the cattle to fresh grazing land. "There are bigger ranches, better-paying jobs." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I suppose I got tired of moving. And I saw you working yourself half to death trying to hold this place together, and I thought maybe we could help each other." "You saw me before that day at the fence?" Eliza asked, surprise coloring her voice. "I rode through about 2 weeks prior, stopped at the creek to water my horse," he admitted, and there was something almost sheepish in his expression. "I watched you hauling water from the well because your pump was broken, making about 50 trips when it should have taken 10 with help. You had this look on your face, this determination, like you were daring the world to try to break you. I could not stop thinking about it." Eliza felt something flutter in her chest, delicate and dangerous. "So you came back." "I came back," he confirmed, and the way he looked at her made her feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with vulnerability and everything to do with being truly seen for the first time in years. The weeks blurred into months as summer gave way to the gentler heat of early autumn. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts in a way it had not since before her husband's death. The cattle were fat and healthy, the fences secure, the buildings sound. Eliza found herself humming while she worked, found herself taking more care with her appearance in the mornings, found herself looking for excuses to work alongside Cole rather than dividing the tasks. She noticed things about him, small details that accumulated like coins in a jar. The way he always gave the animals an extra moment of gentleness, speaking to them in low tones that made even the most skittish horse calm. The way he left wildflowers on the porch rail sometimes, never saying they were for her, but placing them where she would find them. The way his eyes followed her movements when he thought she was not looking, with an intensity that made her skin warm. They began taking their evening meal together, Eliza cooking in the main house and Cole joining her at the worn kitchen table. The conversations stretched longer, ranging from practical discussions about the ranch to deeper topics, dreams and fears and memories. She told him about her father, who had built this ranch from nothing and died believing she could keep it running. She told him about her husband, a good man but never quite suited to the harshness of ranch life, who had worked himself into exhaustion trying to live up to expectations he had set for himself. "You think you will ever want to marry again?" Cole asked one evening, the question coming out of nowhere as they washed dishes side by side, Eliza's hands stilled in the soapy water. "I had not given it much thought. Marriage was not particularly kind to me the first time. Because you loved him or because you did not?" The question was too perceptive, cutting through to a truth she rarely examined. "Because we were never really partners. He wanted to take care of me, to shoulder all the burdens himself, and when he could not, it ate at him. I wanted to share the load, but he thought accepting my help made him less of a man." "That is a lonely way to be married," Cole observed, and there was understanding in his voice. "Yes," Eliza agreed softly. "It was." Cole was quiet for a moment, drying a plate with careful attention. "I think the best partnerships are the ones where both people are strong enough to stand alone but choose to stand together. Where helping each other does not diminish either person but makes them both more." She turned to look at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "Is that what you think we have?" "A partnership?" His blue eyes met hers, steady and sure. "I think we are building one, yes, if that is what you want." What Eliza wanted was suddenly very clear to her, sharp and undeniable in a way that should have been frightening but instead felt like coming home. She wanted this man in her kitchen every evening. She wanted his quiet strength beside her, his careful hands working alongside hers, his steady presence filling the empty spaces she had learned to ignore. She wanted to stop being alone. "I want that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want that very much." Cole set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully, reaching out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Eliza Hartman, I have been halfway in love with you since the day I saw you mending that fence with more determination than any 3 men combined. And I have been fully in love with you since you laughed at my terrible joke about the rooster last week, even though it was not funny." She did laugh then, a surprised burst of joy that felt rusty from disuse. "It was a terrible joke." "I know," he said, grinning, "but you laughed anyway, and that was when I knew I was lost." Eliza reached up to touch his face, her work-roughened fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I think I have been falling in love with you too, though I was too stubborn to admit it to myself. You came here offering help when nobody else would, and you stayed even when the work was hard and the pay was nothing. You treated me like an equal, like someone whose strength added to yours rather than threatened it. You are the strongest person I have ever met," Cole said seriously. "And also the most beautiful, though I suspect you do not hear that often enough." "I look like leather left too long in the sun," she protested, but she was smiling. "You look like home," he corrected, and then he was kissing her, soft and careful as though she might break, as though she were something precious. Eliza kissed him back with 4 years of loneliness and longing, with the fierce passion she brought to everything else in her life, and Cole met her intensity with his own. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself lean into someone else's strength without fear that it would fail her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Eliza. Let me be your partner in truth in every way that matters." "We have only known each other a few months," she said, but there was no real protest in her voice. "I have known you long enough to be certain," he replied, "but if you need more time, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need." Eliza thought about the years stretching ahead, thought about facing them alone versus facing them with this man beside her. Thought about the way her heart felt lighter when he was near, the way the work seemed less burdensome when shared, the way she had started to imagine a future that included more than just survival. "Yes," she said, decision crystallizing with the word. "Yes, I will marry you, Cole Brennan." His smile was brilliant, transforming his weathered face into something radiant. He picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, both of them laughing like children, and Eliza felt young again in a way she had not since before her father died. They were married 3 weeks later by the circuit preacher who passed through town once a month. It was a simple ceremony in the ranch house parlor, witnessed by the few neighbors who had shown up out of curiosity more than friendship. Eliza wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, the ivory fabric still beautiful despite its age. Cole wore a new shirt he had ridden into town to purchase, his hair slicked back and his boots polished. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with unshed tears, and she kissed him back with a promise of all the days to come. The neighbors left quickly after the brief reception, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of a woman marrying her hired hand, but Eliza could not bring herself to care about their opinions. She had spent 4 years learning not to need their approval, and she was not about to start seeking it now. That night, Cole carried her over the threshold of the bedroom that had been hers alone for so long, and he loved her with the same patient thoroughness he brought to everything else. He learned her body like he had learned the ranch, with careful attention and genuine interest. And Eliza discovered that physical intimacy could be something joyful rather than merely dutiful. They came together as equals, giving and taking in turn, and when she fell asleep wrapped in his arms, she felt safe in a way she had not since childhood. The ranch continued to thrive under their joint stewardship. Cole proved to have a good head for business, negotiating better prices for their cattle and finding new markets for their horses. Eliza's skills as a rancher combined with his experience created something greater than the sum of its parts. And by the following spring, they were finally operating at a profit rather than just breaking even. They worked hard, but they also learned to rest together, to take Sunday afternoons off to ride out to the creek and have picnics under the cottonwood trees. Cole taught Eliza to swim in the deeper pools, and she taught him the names of all the wildflowers that grew on their land. They talked about their dreams, about expanding the herd, about maybe building a bigger house someday, about the children they both wanted. "How many do you want?" Cole asked one lazy afternoon as they lay on a blanket by the water, Eliza's head resting on his chest. "At least 3, she said. "I hated being an only child. I always wanted siblings." 3 sounds good, he agreed, his hand tracing lazy circles on her back. "Maybe 4. Let us start with 1 and see how it goes," Eliza laughed. That first child came the following winter, born during a cold snap in early January of 1883. Eliza labored for 12 hours while Cole paced the kitchen like a caged animal, and when the midwife finally emerged to tell him he had a son, he burst into the bedroom with tears streaming down his face. "A boy," he kept saying, staring down at the red-faced infant in Eliza's arms with wonder. "We have a son." They named him James after her father, and he had Cole's blue eyes and Eliza's stubborn chin. Cole was a devoted father from the first moment, getting up for night feedings even though Eliza was nursing, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours walking the baby when he was fussy. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with intricate designs of horses and cattle, and he sang lullabies in a surprisingly tuneful voice. Eliza watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again, deeper and more completely than before. This was what partnership truly meant, she realized. Not just sharing the work of the ranch, but sharing the work of building a life, a family, a future. James was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's brown eyes and her father's easy smile. And then 2 years after that, another son they called Thomas, who came into the world squalling and did not stop until he was 6 months old. The house that had once felt too large and too empty was now filled with noise and chaos and laughter, with muddy bootprints and scattered toys and the endless demands of small children. The work was harder than ever, balancing the needs of 3 young ones with the needs of the ranch, but somehow it felt easier too because they faced it together. Cole would take the children out to the barn while Eliza caught up on paperwork, and she would watch the lessons while he rode out to check the fences. They taught their children to ride as soon as they could walk, to respect the animals and the land, to understand that everything worth having required work and dedication. One evening, when James was 7 and Rose 5 and Thomas 3, the whole family sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. The children were finally quiet after a day of wild energy, Rose falling asleep against her father's shoulder while the boys leaned against their mother. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked Cole softly. "Staying here instead of moving on to something easier?" Cole turned to look at her, his free hand reaching out to take hers. "Not for a single moment. This is everything I never knew I wanted. You, the children, this ranch. This is home, Eliza. You gave me that." "We gave each other that," she corrected, squeezing his fingers. "You offered to help when nobody else would. You saw me struggling, and instead of riding past like everyone else, you stopped. You changed everything." "Nobody ever offered to help me," Cole quoted softly, reminding her of her words that first day. "I could not stand the thought of you facing everything alone anymore. And selfishly, I did not want to face the world alone either." "We are not alone anymore," Eliza said, looking out at the land they had built together, at the fences they had mended side by side, at the life they had created through shared work and shared love. "We have each other. We have this." James stirred against her side, mumbling something in his sleep about horses, and Thomas let out a soft snore. Rose's hand was tangled in Cole's shirt, holding on even in sleep. The ranch stretched out around them, bathed in golden light, solid and thriving and theirs. The years continued to roll by like the seasons, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The children grew strong and capable, learning the ranch work as naturally as breathing. James developed his grandfather's eye for cattle, able to spot a sick animal from 100 yards away. Rose inherited her mother's determination and her father's way with horses, becoming the best rider in the family by the time she was 12. Thomas was the charmer, able to talk his way out of trouble and into extra dessert with equal ease, but he also had a sharp mind for numbers that made him invaluable when it came to the business side of the ranch. The ranch itself expanded over the years. They bought the adjacent property when the owner decided to move back east, adding another 500 acres to their holdings. They built a new barn, larger and better ventilated than the old one, and they constructed a proper bunkhouse for the 3 hired hands they now employed during busy seasons. The original fence that Eliza had been mending the day Cole arrived was replaced with sturdy new posts, but they left one section of the old fence standing as a reminder of where they had started. Eliza and Cole worked side by side through all of it, their partnership deepening with each passing year. They had disagreements, of course, moments of frustration when exhaustion made them short-tempered or when they genuinely could not agree on the best course of action. But they had learned how to fight fair, how to listen to each other's perspectives, how to compromise without either person feeling diminished. They had learned that loving someone meant sometimes putting their needs first, and that being loved meant allowing yourself to be cared for in return. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole took Eliza back to the creek where they had spent so many Sunday afternoons during their courtship. The children were staying overnight with a neighboring family, a rare occurrence that gave them a full night alone. They had packed a picnic and blankets, and as the sun set over the water, Cole pulled out a small wooden box. "I made you something," he said, suddenly looking as nervous as he had the day he proposed. Inside the box was a bracelet, carefully crafted from silver wire twisted into the shape of a fence, each post and rail perfect in miniature. "I have watched you mend fences alone," was engraved on the inside in tiny letters. Eliza's eyes filled with tears as she traced the delicate metalwork. "Cole, this is beautiful. I wanted you to have something to remember," he said softly. "To remember that you never have to be alone again, that whatever fences need mending, whatever problems arise, we face them together." She fastened the bracelet around her wrist, and then she pulled him close for a kiss that tasted of salt and sweetness. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "I know," he replied, holding her tight. "I feel the same way. Like if I lost you, I would lose the best part of myself." They made love under the stars that night, slower and sweeter than in their youth, with the deep comfort that came from knowing every inch of each other's bodies and souls. And when they fell asleep tangled together on the blankets, Eliza dreamed of the future stretching ahead, of years and years more of this contentment, this partnership, this love. The children began to leave as they grew older, though none of them strayed far. James married a schoolteacher from town and built a house on the eastern section of the property, taking over the daily management of the cattle operation. Rose shocked everyone by joining a Wild West show for a few years, performing trick riding for crowds from Texas to New York. But she eventually came home and married one of the ranch hands, settling down to raise horses in a way that combined her love of performance with her love of the land. Thomas went to college in Austin to study business, the first member of either family to receive formal higher education. But he came back every summer to help with the ranch, and eventually took over the financial management while maintaining a law practice in the nearest town. Eliza and Cole found themselves with more time as the children took on more responsibility, though neither of them could imagine fully retiring. They were in their late 50s now, their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work, but they were still strong, still active, still in love. They took to spending their evenings on the porch they had expanded years ago, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. "Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me?" Cole asked one evening. "I asked how long you had been sitting there," Eliza replied, smiling at the memory. "I was so startled I nearly dropped my hammer. You looked fierce," he said fondly, "like you were ready to run me off the property if I gave you any trouble." "I would have," she confirmed. "I had gotten very good at being alone. Too good, maybe. I had almost forgotten how to let anyone in." "I am glad you let me in," Cole said, reaching for her hand, his thumb brushing over the fence bracelet she still wore every day. "I am glad you offered to help," Eliza replied, turning to face him fully. "You changed my life, Cole. You took a woman who was slowly wearing herself down to nothing and reminded her what it meant to share the load. You gave me partnership and love and a family. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," he corrected, echoing her words from years ago. "I was drifting before I found you, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. You gave me a reason to stay, a place to belong. You made me want to build something permanent." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade from the sky. The ranch was quiet around them, the work done for the day, the animals settled. From James's house in the distance came the sound of children laughing, their grandchildren playing before bedtime. The sound made Eliza smile. 7 grandchildren, she marveled. "Can you believe it?" With an 8th on the way, Cole reminded her. Rose was pregnant with her 3rd child due in the spring. "We did good work," Eliza said softly, "not just with the ranch but with the family. We built something that will last." "We did," Cole agreed, "and it started with a broken fence and a conversation." They celebrated their 20th anniversary with a party that filled the ranch house and spilled out onto the grounds. All three children were there with their families, along with the ranch hands and their families, neighbors who had become friends over the years, and various other people whose lives had intersected with theirs. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed twice as many people. As Eliza danced with her husband under strings of lanterns, she thought about how far they had come from that first day when she had been alone with her stubborn determination and her failing fences. She thought about all the moments in between, the hard work and the laughter, the struggles and the triumphs, the quiet evenings and the chaotic mornings. She thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick, fence post by fence post, day by day. Happy. Cole asked, pulling her closer. Happier than I ever imagined I could be, Eliza replied honestly. You, beyond measure, he said, and then he kissed her in front of everyone, and their children groaned good-naturedly while their grandchildren giggled. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both welcome and challenging. They lost one of their oldest friends to illness, buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch he had worked all his life. They celebrated the arrival of more grandchildren, each one a fresh miracle. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, years of good prices and years of poor ones, but they weathered everything together. When they were in their 60s, Cole developed a persistent cough that worried Eliza until the doctor assured them it was nothing serious, just the result of decades of dust and hard work. She still made him rest more, and he grumbled but complied, secretly pleased by her fussing even if he would never admit it. When Eliza injured her back moving a heavy saddle, Cole returned the favor, forcing her to stay in bed for a week while he handled everything, and she was equally grumpy and equally grateful. They were growing old together, their bodies wearing out in the way bodies do after decades of use, but their love remained strong. If anything, it had grown deeper with time, roots going down so far that nothing could shake them loose. They knew each other completely now, every scar and story, every dream and disappointment, every hope and fear. They had seen each other at their worst and their best, and they had chosen each other again and again, day after day, year after year. On a warm spring evening in 1908, exactly 26 years after that first conversation by the fence, Eliza and Cole took their usual spots on the porch. They were both 70 now, their hair silver, their faces lined, their hands gnarled from arthritis. But Cole still reached for Eliza's hand the way he always had, and she still leaned into his shoulder the way she always did. 26 years, Eliza mused. It seems like forever and no time at all. I would do it all again, Cole said. Every moment, every hardship, every joy. I would choose you every single time. Even the time I accidentally shot your hat off your head, she asked, grinning at the memory. Even then, he confirmed, laughing, though I maintain you did that on purpose. I absolutely did not, she protested, but she was laughing too. They fell into companionable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and beautiful, alive with the work of the next generation. James was out checking the cattle with his oldest son. Rose was in the training ring with a new filly. Thomas was in his office in town but would be home for Sunday dinner as he always was. Do you ever think about that day? Cole asked. The day we met, all the time, Eliza admitted. I think about how close I came to sending you away. I was so used to doing everything myself, so convinced that I did not need anyone. If I had been just a little more stubborn, just a little more proud, I would have missed all of this. But you were not, Cole said gently. You were brave enough to accept help. You were strong enough to let someone in. You made it easy, she replied. You did not try to take over or diminish what I had accomplished. You just offered to stand beside me and work together. That was all I needed. That was all either of us needed, Cole said. Someone to stand beside us. They sat together as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Eliza wore the fence bracelet on her wrist, tarnished with age but still beautiful. Cole's hand was warm in hers, familiar and solid. The night was filled with the sounds they had heard for decades, the sounds of home. "I love you," Eliza said, the words as easy and natural as breathing after all these years. "I love you too," Cole replied. "Always have, always will." And there on the porch they had built together, in the home they had created, surrounded by the life they had fought for and worked for and cherished, they sat together in perfect contentment. Two people who had started as strangers, come together by chance and choice, now bound so tightly that neither could imagine existing without the other. The fences stood strong around their land, mended and maintained by many hands now instead of one. The cattle grazed fat and content. The horses ran free in the pastures. The next generation was learning the lessons that Eliza and Cole had learned about work and dedication, about partnership and love, about building something that would last. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they finally went inside, Cole's arm around Eliza's waist, her head resting on his shoulder. They moved slowly now, their bodies protesting the day's activities, but they moved together. They always moved together. In their bedroom, they helped each other undress with the easy intimacy of decades, each knowing without asking where the other's arthritis was worst that day, which movements caused pain and which brought relief. They climbed into bed and arranged themselves in the positions they had occupied for over a quarter century, Eliza's back to Cole's chest, his arm around her waist, her hand covering his. "Good night, my love," Cole whispered into her hair. "Good night," Eliza replied, already drifting toward sleep, safe and warm and home. And if she dreamed that night of a younger version of herself, working alone on a fence line under the brutal Texas sun, she also dreamed of a cowboy on a bay horse who stopped to help, who saw her strength and admired it, who loved her not despite her independence but because of it. She dreamed of the life they had built together, brick by careful brick, and she smiled in her sleep. The morning sun found them still tangled together, beginning another day in a long chain of days that stretched behind and ahead of them. There was work to be done, grandchildren to spoil, challenges to face. But they would face everything together the way they always had, the way they always would. Two people who had been alone, now never alone again. Two people who had needed help but had been too proud or too tired or too hurt to ask for it, who had found each other at exactly the right moment. Two people who had taken a chance on partnership and discovered love. That was their story, and it was a good one. It was a story of hard work and determination, of independence and partnership, of struggle and triumph. But most of all, it was a story of love, the kind of love that started with a simple offer of help and grew into something unshakable, something eternal, something that would echo through the generations that came after them. The fences stood strong. The ranch thrived. The family flourished. And at the center of it all, two hearts that had found each other against all odds and held on tight, through everything life threw at them, until the very end and beyond.